I have spent the last decade dreaming of the absolute perfect astrophotography lens, and it is finally here, the all-new Sony 16mm f1.8G. I am here in the Arctic of Norway, and I have put this thing through its paces. We've done landscape sunrises, sunsets, we've shot astrophotography. I even had northern lights with a moonlight rainbow. It is the perfect lens for travel astrophotography, and it has a permanent place in my bag, replacing both the 20 and the 14. I'm gonna tell you why. Let's get into it. One of Sony's favorite games recently has been releasing G Master caliber lenses, but then labeling them as G lenses and selling them for half the price. And this lens is no different. It's going to be retailing for just $799 US. That is an incredible deal for the optics you get inside. As with all of Sony's prime lenses, the glass inside this lens is just incredible. There are 2 advanced aspherical elements and 3 extra low dispersion elements, which give just beautiful image rendition, low fringing, low chromatic aberration, and just a very sharp image corner to corner. The lens is also fully weather sealed, which is fantastic in a climate like this. And the front element is coated with fluorine, which helps repel water, oil, and even sheep boogers. It's also very cool. Sony gave this the focus characteristics of a cinema lens, 5 times the price. It has dual XD linear focus motors, which are the same ones that are in my $12,000 wildlife photography lens, allowing it to autofocus up to 240 frames per second in video or 120 FPS for stills burst mode. It also has very little focus breathing, which is extremely cool in a lens this size, and a minimum focus distance of just 0.15 meters or only 6 inches. The bokeh rendering is absolutely gorgeous with beautiful soft out of focus areas and perfect roll off. Now, unsurprisingly, this lens is much smaller than the 14mm f1.8 G Master, which I think is its main competition in the photo space, but I was surprised how much smaller it is even than the 20mm f1.8. This lens is just 74 millimeters or 2.9 inches long and weighs just 304 grams or 10.7 ounces, making it 20% lighter than the 20mm f1.8G, which is a fantastic weight savings if you're into hiking or travel landscape photography. You want to save a little bit of weight in your bag. Now, I might be a little bit of an outlier here, but when I hear wide angle fast prime, there is only one thing I think of, and that is astrophotography. I don't think that's meant to be a focus of this lens. I think it's intended to be a little bit more of a video prime. It's got 0 focus breathing, incredible bokeh roll off, beautiful even exposures from the highlights to the shadows. But for me, the 20mm and the 14mm f1.8 lenses from Sony are my all-time favorite astrophotography lenses, but I've often felt that the 20mm wasn't quite wide enough, and the 14mm is almost comically wide in some scenarios. And so I've always wanted something like a 16 right in the middle of the two. We finally have it. It's 16mm f1.8. It's beautiful wide aperture, lets in a ton of light. I've just been shooting some time lapses, some still photos this evening. I cannot wait to go back to the cabin and pixel peep these with you because they look tack sharp and just beautiful. Now listen, there are 100 YouTube reviewers out there that will take photos of grids and color calibration placards, and they're gonna give you a gritty, detailed analysis of lens characteristics. What I wanna see is, are the photos good? Can I use this lens to take photos that will go in my portfolio and I can sell prints, hang it up in a museum? Will it look good on the wall or a gallery? And to me, just looking at these photos in my Lightroom catalog, the answer is absolutely yes. Let's dive into it. So getting started here, this is just a classic astrophoto. It's kind of a bummer when you get stars but no northern lights when you're this far north. But looking at it, zooming in on this, these stars are absolutely tack sharp, which to me, that's what I'm looking for here. Part of what I'm looking for is to see if I can see defined edges on these stars, and you can see this is actually a square. These stars are resolved to a square, which tells me that the lens sharpness is enough to resolve a star down to a single pixel, which is pretty astonishing. That means there's actually more resolution capability for this lens. So if we get a future camera with, say, 100 megapixels instead of the 50 megapixels of this sensor, this lens will still be capable of resolving all the way down to that. I'm seeing, yeah, just square star pixels, which is amazing. Obviously the bigger ones take up more than a single pixel. So I'm looking at the smallest ones here. Going up into the corner, they look long. And that to me, you might be thinking, oh wow, that's a characteristic of a poor lens. That's a little bit of an optical error. But actually that's a function of this lens being rectilinear. And rectilinear just means that lines are straight. So the physics of it is our eyes view about 50 millimeters in focal length. When you're doing something as wide as 16 millimeters, you're actually trying to take a hemispherical image projection and flatten it onto a two-dimensional sensor. And the only ways to do that are either fisheye distortion or rectilinear. So this lens chose to do rectilinear. Looking at this one, so that just means all the lines are straight. So like here, these are straight boards. I mean, some of them are kind of old and broken, so they're more or less straight, but you can see these lines are perfectly straight. So that tells me it's a rectilinear lens. And the trade-off there is that in the corners, you're going to get some pixel stretching. That's just the only way that you can do it. You can't have both no pixel stretching and rectilinear. It's either rectilinear or a little bit of stretching in the corners. I don't really like the fisheye look on my wide angle lenses, so this is a great trade to me. Now, it's worth mentioning also that Lightroom doesn't have a lens profile for this lens, and it did some weird interpretation when I first put these in. So you look at the unedited image, you get, it looks a little bit bowed, and then I have applied a little bit of lens correction. That's actually not what the images look like in camera. As I thumb through my Lightroom catalog, you can actually see that the images are not distorted, and then Lightroom applies a distortion as it loads the visual preview. My best guess is just that this is a lens that doesn't technically exist yet, and so Lightroom is making a guess as to what the focal length and everything is, and it's getting it wrong. So I'm showing you edited images with that correction applied because the unedited ones are actually like falsely distorted by Lightroom, which is strange. By the time you see this review though, this lens will be out and Lightroom will be able to properly interpret the images, so this won't be a concern in real life. Going back, let's look at a couple more astro photos. This is a Northern Lights image, just a beautiful night we had out there. Again, this one's a little nicer. The ISO is a little bit lower because this was such a bright display. So we can see these stars are absolutely tack sharp. Look at that one, a perfect square, a perfect square, a perfect square. Just an unbelievably sharp lens. And I mean, look at how dang far I'm zoomed in. The detail rendering is crazy. Even at high ISO, there's some noise here. We're getting incredible, like you can see the textures of the snow and the ice in the corners, even through the ISO noise. Just an incredibly sharp lens, corner to corner, obsessed with it. Here's the raw image, if you're curious. You can see that sort of false distortion there. I want to talk a little bit about the vignette, because I know that's one of the concerns that people have. Here's the edited one again. Here's unedited. The vignette is not bad, I think. That's a very minor quantity of vignette on the raw image. It's a little darker in the corners. Yes, you can see it up in this top right corner more than in the top left. And it's actually a great demonstration. There's light in the top left, and so the vignette's basically invisible. This is at f1.8. This is wide open. That's as much vignette as you're going to get. That's pretty darn minor to me. We'll look at a daytime image to get another example of the vignette. I also shot this wide open. We all know that lenses are sharp at like f5.6, so I shot this one wide open. I shot almost all of these wide open because for me, f1.8, if you have that aperture, you want to use it. And so I want to see how the lens performs at its extremes. So this one, again, unedited, the raw, barely any visible vignette, incredibly sharp all the way through. And then looking at like the bird, I noticed that it looked like there was a little bit of fringing or chromatic aberration on his wings. But again, the unedited version doesn't have that. So that's just an artifact of my editing process, and the result, adding some color in the sky, added a little bit of false fringe to that bird. But again, a beautiful image from this lens, deep contrast in the shadows and deep, rich highlights, a ton of detail rendered, a huge amount of dynamic range, just overall like beautiful images coming out of this thing. Again, here's a good example of the rectilinear. There's no lens correction on this. These lines are nice and straight. So I wanted to see what kind of flare we were getting with those 3 extra low dispersion elements. And I didn't get quite enough real sunlight to test it, but it looks great. I don't see any weird ghosting or any of those green orbs in this frame. There's a little bit of a moire on this fence, but that's not really a function of the lens. Now, we were talking about wide open, but let's also talk about fully stopped down. I shot this at f/22, and this blew my mind. We're all used to lenses where you get it and they have a range from f/1.8 to f/22, and you have to basically stay between f4 and f/16 because the edges of that range are bad. That's not the case with this lens. I shot the whole week at f/1.8 and it's tack sharp with no vignette. This is f/22, again, no vignette, but look at unbelievably sharp. You get this beautiful sun star from the aperture blades. The mountains in the back are sharp. The mountain that's in focus is sharp. But what blows my mind is down here in the corners at f/22, we're getting details like this. You can see individual snowflakes on the snow at f/22 all the way down in the corners. That's just unbelievable amounts of sharpness and usability from a lens. So personally, I'm kind of excited to have a lens where the entire aperture range is functional. I think this came out really beautiful, and it kind of allows you to do a little bit less with neutral density filters. You can carry some less gear in your bag if you want. Now, looking at the bokeh on this lens, I love the way that it renders out of focus foreground elements. Obviously, this mountain and the cabins in the back are extremely sharp, but I love the way that it renders the bokeh on this foreground element. A lot of people, when they test bokeh, will put the focused element in the foreground and they'll just look at the background. To me, it's kind of important to do a little bit of both, but these look really nice. It's super soft. It's not like globular, or there's not any sort of weird like chunky gradient. It's nice and smooth. They're just kind of blurry, which I think is beautiful. Turning off my edit so you can see how it rendered directly out of the camera. Really, really nice looking, really smooth roll off as you head into the out of focus areas. This image to me was a good example of where I thought I had some chromatic aberration again on this mountain. You look at it, kind of seems like there's some fringing, but again, the raw image shows almost none of that. It's more just background glow from the sun being over there. And the final image to me came out fantastic. This was with the neutral density filter, stopped down to f4.5. So it's not just the raw lens itself. I've got a filter in front of it here, but fantastic for long exposures. I love the 16mm field of view. You're able to just fit so much in the frame. Incredible landscape lens. We're getting a ton of detail and color on these landscape shots. And again, the sharpness on this just blows my mind. This is at f1.8. This is a handheld image, 1/2500th of a second. 16mm. We can zoom in all the way across the bay and see not just how many windows are on this little shack, but you can even see that they have white trim around the windows. That's an outrageous amount of detail rendering from a lens this size and at this price point. Incredible. Just, I'm obsessed with it. I can't say enough how much I love this lens. Again, just a nice photo of some birds, incredible detail rendering on the boat itself. Every single bird in the sky is tack sharp. I'm not seeing any fringing, any sort of weird chromatic aberrations, Everything's sharp, corner to corner. You can count the danged waves down here. Oh, and one other thing that I love about having an f1.8 lens for the aperture that wide, it's for daytime photos not necessarily quite as helpful. Obviously it's good for bokeh. You might have noticed I did a lot of astrophotography on this trip. That's because, as I explained, I think this is primarily an astrophotography lens. The reason that's important to me, especially for things like northern lights, is having that wider aperture allows a shorter shutter speed, which then allows you to have a shorter interval and do better time lapses. The northern lights specifically move very fast. I don't want to have to do a 5-second interval because they can get cooking so fast that you can't actually see the smooth, beautiful motion. This f1.8 allows me to take photos like this with a 1.6 second exposure. You can see how bright it was here. It's a 1.6 second exposure at ISO 800. But it allowed me to do a time lapse with just a 2-second interval. So you get these beautiful northern lights time lapses. You get beautiful astrophotography time lapses. You can slow things down while doing a time lapse and really get to see the details of how things move. And you don't get that luxury with an f2.8 lens because all of your exposures have to be 2 or 3 times the length. So that's a massive benefit of this lens to me. This is the last photo I wanted to show. This is just a nice example of a beautiful sunrise. You can kind of see when I turn off the lens correction that there's, that weird kind of distortion correction from Lightroom is gone. But again, vignette, minimal in the corners here. Sharpness, corner to corner. I love the way that it's bringing out all this contrast and color in the water. Just an incredible amount of detail captured in this lens. Again, not the most technical analysis of this lens. I was just interested if it makes beautiful images, and it does, like no questions asked. I love the way these look. I'm going to buy this day one. This is a day one pre-order for me. I didn't get paid for this review. I don't get to keep the lens. I'm absolutely going to buy one using my own money. If you're going to buy it also, I have a link in the description below. It would help me out a ton if you would click that when you make your purchase. Costs you nothing, just helps me out a little bit. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching. My name is Nate in the Wild. I'll see you next time.